God, it's so exciting. Happy Hail Bob Day.
It is a happy Hail Bob Day.
That was our elo coming into the competition.
Eventing manager is back.
Best show that we have, Alphabetti Spaghetti.
Looking forward to seeing quality horses.
I mean, you're a bit of an eventing geek just like us. Hello, listeners. Welcome back. Welcome to the third in our little mini-series here. Delighted to say I have managed to persuade both Louise and Tina to join me again. It's a hardship, I know. Louise, I trust you're still well.
I am. Thank you, Spike. Thanks for having me back.
Very good. And Tina, I've not scared you off yet.
No, I've just topped up my glass of wine, so I'm absolutely fine.
You can stay. Right. So we've in the first two episodes, we got through to cross country morning, I would say. Maybe even if we just touch on cross country night. Louise, what about night before cross country? Are we doing anything different? Are we suddenly making any drastic changes? Are we carb loading like we would be if God forbid I ever considered doing a marathon? Which is a ridiculous thought. What's the advice?
No, definitely not carb loading. So, any sort of massive change to the diet is not going to be beneficial. So obviously free access to forage. You want the horses to have good digestive function, be chewing, get that stomach nice and healthy. So try where possible just to stick to kind of a normal routine. If you had a very early start time in the morning, your evening meal might actually be your last meal before cross country, because you don't want to feed too close to your start time in terms of your hard feed or your concentrate feed. But no, try and keep things simple and straightforward, no massive changes. And carb loading, definitely not a good option. It's not going to help, and if anything, could cause you problems like, if you suddenly introduce a very carbohydrate or non-structural carbohydrate reach feed the night before, you could end up with a colic or something like that and actually not getting to cross country. So keep things as simple and as straightforward as you can, and just bear in mind what time your start might be in that morning, because that may dictate when your last concentrate meal would be, or your horse's last concentrate meal would be.
Okay, Tina, and is that what you would follow too as well? I mean, do you think the horses know that it's the night before cross country? Do they pick up on on badminton on a Friday evening? Have they all picked up on a little bit of nervous excitement and suddenly gone off their food? Or
it's usually the riders that are sitting in the loo, or maybe I think we think that they might know that. Look, some of them highly intelligent ones might be aware that something's coming up, but most of the time it's us in our heads. I agree with Louise. I wouldn't do anything too dramatically different, because I wouldn't have cut down their feed before their dressage test anyway. I would make sure that they were work relative to the feed they were getting anyway. I would make sure that they had something to eat, not too dramatically different, but if it meant that I needed to add a bit of mix or a little bit of corn just to make sure that they've got the food into them. If I had a particularly early start, I would just make sure I got up earlier and that they had some feed, whether that was me or groom that's working for me, that they would get a feed sort of 2.5 hours before. But if it is a really early start, I'll just give them a slightly smaller breakfast. But I would like them to get some grub into them. And I wouldn't, if I had a sort of greedy, slightly heavier horse, I wouldn't give them any extra hay either if they had an earlier start. So I would be similar in the fact of whether it was hard feed or hay, I would take it away a couple of hours before.
That's interesting. So you would take their forage away from 2 hours beforehand.
Yes, I'm not somebody that likes to compete on a full stomach. I don't think I would perform well if I had a lot of food in my stomach. So if the horses have eaten normally up until that point, they don't know what their start time is, that they're picking away. I leave their water with them the whole time. I know in the old days we used to take their water away. As somebody said to me, why would a horse suddenly drink a bucket of water an hour before they go cross country? No, they wouldn't. Why would they if their water is still there? So I leave their water with them, but I would take their hay away. I wouldn't like a horse gorging on its hay. If you happen to have a particularly greedy one, before it's got to do a strenuous 3-day.
Mm.
And I'm talking about a strenuous 3-day rather than necessarily a casual lob round a B100. I wouldn't be as strict at that level, but if we're talking about a 3-day where they have got to gallop from 9 to 12 minutes, no, I wouldn't want them to be gorging on a hay net before that. No,
it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because we all know about the importance of fibre in terms of, gastric ulcer health and hind gut health. But equally, as Tina said, if you have something that gorges and has a gut full of fibre, given that fibre is going to have a water holding capacity as well, that extra weight may not be beneficial in terms of performance at that high levels. So it's a really fine balance. And what I would say is that the 2-3 hours is probably your limit, if you like. We know that if the horse is left without anything to chew on for 3-4 hours, that's when you start to get a lot of gastric juices in the stomach. And then if you're then asking them to go out and gallop and jump, that's going to be splashing around and increase the risk of gastric ulcers. So what some people do, like Tina, is maybe take away the hay or the haylage, the main forage, but maybe just kind of the hour before they start, give them a little bit of sort of a short chop fibre, if you like. And that, just helps to create a mat in the stomach so that it helps stop that acid splashing around when they are galloping and jumping. So yeah, it's a strategy that can be used if you're not feeding up for the whole time. Now, some horses will just pick at their forage, and you can feed them right up until your start time. They won't gorge on it. And if you know your horse, it goes back to knowing what your horse is like around their feeds. And yeah, sometimes the chaffs can be a really good option if you do have to restrict forage a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, isn't it? And I think also it comes to knowing your horse. Are they, have you previously diagnosed them with ulcers? Are they gastric ulcer candidates? There's absolutely no reason why they can't have half a tube of whatever omeprazole version you're feeding on the morning of cross country, if not the days beforehand. And I think we haven't touched on that yet, but I think that's worthy of conversation, and it's very easily done. It's within the regulations and within the rules, and I think quite rightly, under horse welfare conditions as well. So I think that's, that all sounds really good. And I think, as you say, that, that little bit of short chop, bit of chaff beforehand can just put a little bit of a mat in. I'm not sure if I'd be doing it necessarily before cross country, but definitely show jumping. I think that's a really effective thing to do to try and stop those splash lesions. How soon after cross country are you offering some food? I'm going to go back to Louise first on this one. Do you offer food quite quickly, or is there any data or is there any information about saying that's not a good idea?
I generally would wait for a couple of hours, so the horse has had adequate time to kind of cool down, maybe drink some water, maybe take on board some electrolytes and settle. So I would generally say about 2 hours would be your minimum to try and then feed them. And like Tina has said, it's about small meals, little and often. Horses are not brilliant. Like, with humans, if I went and ran a marathon, very unlikely, but if I went and ran a marathon, I'd probably sit down, 30 minutes afterwards to a big bowl of pasta to try and get my muscle glycogen stores back up. The horse is not very efficient at replenishing muscle glycogen quickly. It takes them quite a long time. So actually a couple of hours after cross country, and then small frequent meals throughout the day is just going to help them to recover. But there's no point trying to give them a huge feed, an hour after exercise. I think you're just asking for problems. So yeah, wait until they've cooled down. I'm not quite sure what Tina does. Hopefully it's something
Tina,
along those lines.
In your experience, Tina, what have you seen? When would you be offering a food, or do you just say, look, they've got to come back in, they've got to recover, they've got to have a drink, and then we'll offer them some food, further down the line? what's routine for you, but I mean, clearly there must be differences.
Well, I think routine is generally a couple of hours. I agree. It passes by the time you finish your cross country. You've got the horses washed off, cooled down, being passed by the vet to leave. They're all healthy and everything else. And then I would try and find them some grass if I can. I mean, I know around the world there are some venues where the grass isn't an option. And that was the case. I would offer them some soaked hay or something like that. But generally, I would go off and walk the horses and find some grass. And the more walking around and getting them to sort of chill out. And to be honest, that's a couple of hours past. Or I would get them back to the stable where, again, you'd want them to have been drinking as much as possible. And I wouldn't be wanting to feed them too much. I would only, if they were a horse that wasn't drinking, so therefore you're getting a little bit worried, I'd only offer it a very, very, very small feed, and in the hope that stimulates it to then have a drink, and somebody to be watching it to monitor that, because it is really, really important. You know, most horses will have a drink when they come back, to be honest. It is quite unusual. But, you know, again, just little and often, and dealing with the situation of how the horse is reacting to its performance, whether it's gone well or not. But yeah, a bit of good old green grass is the best thing in my mind to line the stomach before you start giving them anything else.
And Tina, do you
go out and giving them a late feed at 10 o'clock at night? You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, I do that in my build up to Badminton. I'm not going to shy away and say that Billy the Red is a very fussy little horse. He doesn't eat much breakfast and much lunch. So once we're talking tonight, I will go out and give him a 11 o'clock feed, a small feed, but anything to get food into him. And it's dark, and he's more likely to eat those two feeds. So I get 2 feeds into him. And yes, it's annoying to have to go out late at night, but that's what you need to do sometimes.
I think that's interesting. You were saying about how you like to take them for a bit of a walk and a leg stretch in those first sort of couple of hours afterward. Is that your routine for them as well, or are you wanted to get them back and get layers of ice on their front legs? What are you doing in those first few hours after the end of cross country?
I do think icing is good, but I equally think some people go completely overboard and get completely nuts over it when the ground is soft and muddy and people are icing their horses every 2 seconds. Look, I think be realistic. Yes, there are very good ice boots and things that you can put on the horses. But what I slightly struggle with is people putting ice boots as soon as the horses are just finished and they're still blowing, putting very tight boots on the top of hard ice and then expecting the horses to walk all the way home with a very tight boot or bandage on the horse's legs. To me, actually get the horses to wind down and get their muscles and get their temperature down, deal with that, and then put the icing on. Wait 20 minutes until the horses calm down. And it depends on where the finish of the cross country is and where the stables are. Once they're back at the stables, I am all for a good old ice cube, to be honest, in the pack. And 20 minutes on, half an hour off, 20 minutes on, half an hour off, depending on the horse and depending on the ground conditions. If the ground is firm and hard and the horses are really galloped on it, I think, yes, it is good to get the horses' legs as cold as possible. But I think sometimes it can be taken to a whole new level that I do wonder how much benefit that is to the horse. But
yeah, I totally agree, Tina. I think it's about working out what's the biggest limitation for the horse at any moment in time, isn't it? And when they finish cross country and they're finishing with a temperature above 40 and, getting that core temperature down and getting those muscles to recover is the most immediate concern. I mean, the concern with the legs and the tendons is, that inherent core heat within the tendons and is what we want to get rid of them, because that's been shown to be associated with the micro damage that causes the cumulative issues. But I would totally agree with you. I've seen horses that, big old, boots and bandages with ice strapped on, and they limp around a washdown area because they've got a tight here and they're kicking out there, and they've then trodden on themselves with stud still in, and everyone's cringing in the corner. And I think, it's being calm, it's being planned and processed in how we're going to do this, and it's not just quite literally all hands on deck, chucking things and attaching and reattaching things. It can be, much as it's organized chaos, I've also seen plenty of occasions where it's just genuine chaos.
Yeah, I don't mean to be a miserable old thing, but and I do believe in icing the horse's legs, but as you quite rightly said, I just think just be practical with it. There are times when I felt like saying, whose benefit is that horse, as you quite rightly said, limping along? I think it's more for the riders than it is for the horses half the time.
Yeah. I remember at the finish at Blenheim one year approaching one of Andrew Nicholson's horses with a thermometer and being told precisely where I was going to stick that, and how it wasn't entirely relevant to what they were going to do for the first 20 minutes. But I think that's true.
Did you get that look? No, did you get that look as if to say, clear off with that?
Do you know, it wasn't even just a look. But anyway, but I think those are, those immediate times after, it's a stressful time, and everyone's in balance, and everyone's completely joyous, but everyone wants to know what's going on with their legs and everything like that. But I think, a good plan is really important. Who's doing what? Everyone's got to have a job, and it can be more organised chaos than chaos. So we've got them back to the stables. You've given them a little feed. We're busy with our icing. We're monitoring our hydration. I think that's really important. Again, veterinary chatting about hydration. But Saturday night at a big 3-day, 4-5-star level, that rehydration is so important to ensure muscle function and recovery for the next day. There would be a proportion of horses that will, that can be done with intravenous drips. It's more efficient for them to do it by drinking, to be perfectly honest, much as vets like giving drips. But if a horse will drink, that is a far better way of getting that rehydration into them. And as I say, ensuring that muscle function hopefully for a clear round on the Sunday.
A lot of the stuff that we're talking about is also weather dependent. Do you not agree? With a lot of subjects, if it is very hot and the horses have travelled and they physically sweated because they're travelling, or physically sweated a lot while they're in the competition, I totally agree. But equally, if it's cold and everything else, the hydration, yes, we need to be aware of, but isn't quite at the same level as when it's hot. And I know that's really common sense, but quite a lot of the time it is common sense, and it's being prepared that if you get unseasonably hot weather or unseasonably cold weather, that you deal with it accordingly. I don't think a lot of what we're saying we have to do every single event when it's cold.
It goes back to knowing your horse as well. Some horses just get sweatier than others, whether their fitness or their temperament, what it is, but some horses will obviously sweat more than others. So it's about knowing what's normal for your horse and monitoring your individual horse. And I think in terms of post cross country, there are obviously some other dietary things that we can maybe do, or strategies that we can look at to try and aid recovery. So there's things like some branched chain amino acids, your antioxidants, things like ubiquinol CoQ10. That's received a lot of press recently in the sort of nutrition field. So there are definitely strategies that we are perhaps learning more about or understanding in a bit more detail now as nutritionists, that we may build in to these horses' diets to help them recover. So they mightn't be things that you just do after cross country. They may be built into the longer term plan of feeding in the lead up to and during these events. But a good nutritionist will be able to sit down and discuss those with you and explore what options are going to be best for your individual horse.
It's interesting that the weather thing as well that you were just saying about, Tina. I also see quite a lot of challenges when horses move to a different weather system than they've necessarily been at home. And we did our previous whole box episodes in the run up to Tokyo about the planning for that, of horses going from a moderate climate as we have in Europe to what was going to be more extreme over in Tokyo. But even within Europe, it can be 10-15 degrees different from one week to the next in England at the moment. So I think that can be a challenge in itself. It can still be over 30 degrees, but if that's what horses are used to in the build up to it, our listeners in Australia and competing in down in those more arid countries, they cope with it better because that's kind of what they're used to, rather than that sort of shock of alteration and changes. So I think that's got to be considered as well. There's definitely been warm Badmintons when it's been cold through the spring, and that and they can definitely have their can throw a just a bit of a a curveball into the mix there. Right,
Also,
go on, Tina. Yep.
Sorry, I keep thinking of things. Sorry. And some people, I think when you're talking about working horses in the climate, what you think you're going to be riding in. So like when I rode in Hong Kong or when we rode in Tryon, it was going to be very hot. Actually, I cantered my horses in the hottest part of the day. I'm not saying I worked him every day in the hottest part of the day, because obviously then you could possibly run them down and get too dehydrated. But I personally, and I know not everybody would think that, rather than getting up early and cantering them when it's cool, actually there were times when I thought, no, I want to monitor you and canter you when it is hot. I want to know how much you're going to sweat. I want to know what your recovery is, because some horses cope with the heat and blow more, and that would be normal for them. But if you don't know that, then you could have a bit of a panic on that your horse is just not recovering. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's suddenly become unfit in a week or that it's ill, but actually it needs to blow more to calm its body down. So sometimes actually by riding in the temperature that you may be competing in, it's sometimes, in my mind, quite a good thing. But that might just be a personal crazy thing.
No, I think there's some really good data on that, and there's some really good evidence about that, and that sort of acclimatization before getting there, as you say, galloping in the hottest part of the day, galloping with rugs on as well, to just try and drive that that heat around them. Listeners, we did talk about it on a couple of whole box episodes I did with an FEI vet called Chris Elliott in the build up to Tokyo, where we were talking about what riders might be doing in planning for Tokyo and what could be put in place for that, and worth a listen if you've not listened to it before. Louise, Tina, that's brilliant. I think that's cross country day, stressful day for everyone, not least the rider apparently, and also for the support team. But hopefully we've had a successful day. The horse is back. We're drinking well. We've had a good feed and a successful Sunday. And hopefully in our we're going to talk about in our final episode of this series is something that's probably a little bit overlooked, in my opinion. That those days and weeks following a big competition or a long format, what we can do to help the recovery at that stage, and what we can be looking at there, and hopefully trying to improve for the next time, but also be in a position of replenishing those stores that have been used up during the 3 days. So Louise, Tina, thank you again. I'm going to be bothering you one more time for our last episode in the series, which will be coming up very soon.
Looking forward to it, Spike.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Epir Eventing podcast.
Have a wonderful day, everybody, and I look forward to having you back with us soon.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more.
Listeners, we'll speak to you again soon.